All right. I didn't do a video last week. I just got busy doing a lot of stuff, prepping for debates out there in Denver. And incidentally, if you're in Denver, you can check it out on the homepage. Um, I wanted to talk about man's will, um, fairness, and God's sovereignty. I talked about this on the radio today. Uh, so if you listen to the radio and you're listening to this, there's going to be a lot of repeat in it. But I didn't want to get as hard as I did. I kind of did get hard with people on the radio. But there's something I didn't talk about today I want to mention too. But here's what happened. I had, when I was out in front of the Mormon temple last 3 weeks, I had my sign is mormonismchristian.com, and I would walk up and down the sidewalks, and I would be there talking to the Mormons. At one time, the way the temple arrangement was on Sunday, I didn't go to church on Sunday. They had an not an open house, but a dedication of the temple. And so the Mormons had to come out on their sidewalk out to the street where I was, and then the street went to my right, and people were on the sidewalk right there, and I was on the street preaching at them for 20 minutes. They're 30 feet away, and I would just continue to talk about Mormonism. No big deal. So I'm not here to talk about that, but about a week or so ago, a Mormon out there agreed to come over to my house, and he was here today. We talked for about an hour. One of the very few Mormons ever who will actually take me up on a challenge to discuss, to talk, and things like that. And a nice guy. He left believing in Mormonism all the more, but he did take some literature and some handouts and some stuff that I printed up for him. I mean, and that's saying a lot. All right. Later today, a couple hours after the Mormon guy left, I have an atheist neighbor, and he's a nice guy. And his family's Christian, and the Christians know who I am from the radio show here in the area, and they got a kick out of that. And so my friend, I call him a friend, whatever, atheist guy, he wants to take my wife out to dinner and stuff. He's he's a nice enough guy. He just doesn't believe in God. But the Lord's working on him, and that's obvious. He comes over and talks to me. He has questions. He disagrees with things and stuff. Okay, well, some of his relatives or friends came over with him to help get some stuff out of his garage. And so I happened to be out there with him when they drove up, and so he introduced me to them. And one of them is an atheist. And so my neighbor said, "Oh, this is the guy," went into me, "that can talk about atheism." Well, that opened the door for conversation, and I'm going to cut to the chase. So after a while, the guy asked me, and it was a real friendly conversation, but he asked me, he said, "So let me get this straight. You're telling me that people who just happen to be born in false religions are going to hell?" I said, "Yep." And he said, "Well, that's not fair." And it was really interesting, and he says, "That's not fair. That's not right." And so hold that thought. When I was talking to the Mormon, and our conversations evolved into this same kind of a topic, because what I was doing was telling him that salvation is not dependent upon our goodness or our ability to keep the law, but only through the work of Christ, and that we're saved by faith alone. I said God even grants that we believe. Philippians 1:29. He even gives us the ability to have that faith. John 6:28-29. I was trying to show him that it's God's work, and he said, "Wait, are you telling me then that if God doesn't give this to them, they won't be saved?" I said, "That's right." And he said, "Well, that's not fair." And it was really interesting that both the Mormon today and the atheist today both took the position of moral superiority to decide what was fair and what was not fair, what God should and should not do. I didn't have much of a chance to talk about this with the Mormon guy today, but I did with the atheist guy, because the Mormon guy had to leave right about this time. I told the Mormon guy to read Romans 9:9-23. I said, write it down, write it down. So he's going to check out Romans 9, verses 9-23. And he had to go. So that ended there. But the atheist guy said, look, and I said, I'm not trying to be rude to you, but who are you to decide what is right and wrong morally? Who are you to say what God can and cannot do? Who are you to decide what is fair and what is not fair? As an atheist, all you have is your subjectivity. You don't have a universal moral absolute you can appeal to and say this is ontologically wrong. You can only say, no, this is wrong because I don't like it. And that is nothing but subjectivity, and subjectivism is self-refuting, because how do you know your subjectivism is true? Absolutely true. You can't. It's subjective, so it refutes itself. You can't even know if your subjectivism is true. Well, having laid this groundwork out, what I thought was interesting was how both groups, well, both individuals, both said the same thing. They both said that it was unfair for God to be the sovereign king to pick who he wants. They were both taking the place of being superior to God and saying, God can't do this. I will tell you what is fair. And that's what struck me today, was that this issue of fairness, according to what man decides, not what God decides, that's a problem. And so, I was struck by that. And it occurred to me also within the Christian faith that, excuse me, it occurred to me also that within Christianity, the same kind of, I'm going to just say, self-righteous attitude is prevalent, in that there are a lot of Christians in the church who will say that it's not right for God to decide who's saved and who's not saved. They say that's not the God that I serve. That's not fair. And the same objection as the Mormon and Jehovah's Witness, as not Jehovah's Witness, excuse me, as the Mormon and the atheist, who both objected today about God's sovereignty. Both of them said they did not like the idea of God being able to be the one who would judge what is true, what is morally right, obligation of people, what is fair, not fair, and the whole bit. And they just objected. And what I learned out of it, or I guess what I was exposed to even more, was that self-righteousness, like I said. And yet, I'm reminded of the same kind of self-righteousness that exists in so much of the Christian church today. I'm Reformed, and I don't hide that. I believe in God's sovereignty over man's total depravity. I believe the Bible clearly teaches us that the unbeliever is a slave of sin, a hater of God, can do no good, doesn't seek for God, etc., which is why God has to predestine and elect and grant that we believe in things like that. And this is a display of his sovereignty, which is manifested completely and totally in Romans 9 through 23. And I'm just still thinking about it, that the truth is that we as people don't bow to God's sovereignty. We want our own. That there's something in us, in our fallenness, that's common to the Mormon, to the atheist, even to some Christians, who say, no, it's not right, that God is the one who decides who's saved and not saved. They say it must be fair, it must be true the way I decide, the way I recognize, the way common sense says, or whatever it is that they might say. And I have a problem with that, of course. Of course, I objected to this doctrine when I first heard it back in college, but once I was exposed to the truth of what the Word of God said, I submitted to it. And now I teach it. And the reason I teach it is because that's what God's Word says. Anyway, there's something, I don't know, I'm just missing something, or there's something more attached to this. And sometimes, I don't know if you've ever heard this saying, sometimes you got to talk until you know what it is you need to say. That's kind of how I feel right now, because there's something more going on. There's something behind this, and I'm intrigued by it. There obviously is the spiritual depravity that we have. And out of Genesis 3, 1 through 6, where Adam and Eve had the conversation, and essentially it was about trusting God at his word or not, and then submitting the truth of God and what he says to our sensibilities, what we consider right and wrong. And that Eve saw that the fruit was good and decided to eat it. Maybe that's what I'm looking for, in that I see the Edenic lie, that lie from Eden, that is echoing through our hearts today. That lie that says that we will be like God, knowing good and evil, and we'll be the ones who decide what is true and what is morally right. Well, this bothers me because I saw it manifest in the Mormon. I saw it manifest in the atheist. I see it manifest in Christians. But what really bothers me is I wonder how much it's manifesting my own heart. Because, when if there's a bad smell in your own home, you're so used to it, you don't notice it. And you become accustomed to your own sin. So I have to wonder, am I guilty of this as well? Some place, somehow. I can only ask God to show me. But I think, at least for me, I think the understanding comes in considering the superiority of God, the sovereignty of God in everything, in every detail. Let me let's see if I can remember some of these verses off the top of my head. Let me show you the screen and scriptures. Let's see if I can do this. Come on, here we go, share. And this is from memory, so hold on. Well, you know what? I don't have to do that. I can do it this way. What I can do is go to my website. I've got this listed out. Oh, I got a little, come on, stop that. Okay, come on, there you go. All right. And so go to carm.org. There's an article I've written on Jesus and libertarian free will, or Jesus. Oh, sorry about that. Live. Okay, Jesus and compatibilism. I want to explain something here. Compatibilism is the teaching that God's sovereignty and God's predestination are compatible with our human free will. And I did some research on this, and look what I found. Jesus says that he can do nothing of himself unless it is something he sees a Father doing. I can do nothing on my own initiative. I come down from heaven not to do my own will, but the will of him who sent me. I do nothing of my own initiative, he says. I always do things that are pleasing to him. I do not speak on my own initiative. You see, we have these verses here, and let's get that bigger. Let's see, yeah. And as you can see, the will of Jesus himself was to do whatever the Father said, not anything of his own will. He only wanted to do what the Father wanted him to do. He only wanted to say what the Father wanted him to say. He only wanted to do that which is pleasing to the God the Father. That, I think, is the heart of what it means to be a Christian as we follow Christ, and not desire our own sovereignty, our own wills, and not desire to be the one who's going to judge what is fair or not. So these words of Christ, they kind of stick with me. And I wrote this article months ago, and lately it's been kind of coming back, these scriptures, these issues. And I wonder about it. I wonder, just wonder, how much I'm doing this in the wrong way. I mean, how much I am seeking my own sovereignty. And when I really apply this, it comes in the issue of prayer and finances and health and all things, to really submit to the will of the Father. And in so doing, I think that we all should be doing this, just as Jesus did. I'd like to be able to say that I do nothing of my own initiative. I only do what the will of the Father is, that I always do what's pleasing to him. I don't even speak of my own initiative. I'd like to say those things and have them be true. Not true. And if I ever get there, it'll take about a kabillion years. But anyway, I've been thinking about this, just putting all together, and just kind of wondering uh, what you think about it. Maybe you can leave some comments or stuff, or you can pray through these things. But anyway, get back to the initial the stuff was. The Mormon today and the atheist today both complained um, about the sovereignty of God. Both of them did not want the sovereignty of God. And I think that's fascinating. That both the Mormon and the atheist I met today stood against the sovereignty of God in his right to do with his creation as he desires and grant salvation to whom he desires. And both called it unfair. And in both cases, they were presupposing that their moral judgments were superior to God and that they were the ones who knew what was right and wrong. Fascinating. Anyway, those are my thoughts for today. I hope you have a great time. I hope this is stimulating information or thinking in you as well. And I just hope that continue to do these and hope they bless you, and may the Lord bless you greatly. And hopefully, Lord willing, be on next week. We'll talk to you then.